I sealed the envelope on a Tuesday evening, set it on my kitchen counter next to a cup of coffee I had forgotten to drink, and waited for everything to catch up. My older sister had spent 30 years teaching me exactly what I was worth to this family. I had finally decided to agree with her and send the bill. Growing up in Nashville, there was a version of every holiday that existed in my memory as something warm, something steady. My father grilling on the back porch in July, flour on the counter at Thanksgiving, the particular smell of pine and wood smoke every December. And somewhere inside all of that warmth, there was my sister, who had decided before I was old enough to understand what it meant that the two of us were in a competition I had never agreed to enter. She was 6 years older. By the time I started kindergarten, she had already claimed every room she walked into. Teachers loved her. Relatives asked about her first. At dinner, she spoke the longest and loudest, and when I said something, she had a talent for responding to whatever I said as though I had not quite said it, as though my version of the sentence needed to be corrected before anyone else could process it. My father noticed. I know now that he noticed everything. But he was the kind of man who believed in watching before he spoke, who believed that patience was not passivity. He would catch my eye across the table sometimes, just a small glance, the kind that said, "I heard you. I see what just happened." And then he would pass the potatoes and the evening would move on. My mother loved us both in her way, but she loved peace more than she loved fairness, which meant that whenever my sister and I were in conflict, the resolution always looked like me backing down. It was easier, my mother said. She did not mean it as criticism. She genuinely believed that the less friction, the better, and that I was the one capable of producing less friction, and that this was a compliment. I learned to agree. My sister married a man named Derek when she was 28. He had money, or at least the appearance of money, which in Nashville in the circles she ran in amounted to the same thing. They bought a house in Belmead, drove matching SUVs, and suddenly my sister had a new vocabulary. Investment portfolio, curated aesthetic, vertical living, that she used the way some people use cologne too much in every room. I was working as an occupational therapist at a rehabilitation center in East Nashville. I had student loans. I had a small apartment with a bathroom tile that was cracked in the corner and a landlord who responded to maintenance requests in geological time. I loved my work. I was good at it. My patients were mostly elderly, post-surgery, learning to button shirts again or grit forks again or truss their legs again after the ground had betrayed them. I found the work meaningful in a way that was hard to explain at family dinners. So mostly, I did not try. At family dinners, my sister talked. I helped my father clear the table. It was my father who had built the family business, a regional logistics company he had started in his 30s with one leased truck and a stubbornness that his accountant had called recklessness and that history had called correct. By the time I was in high school, the company employed 40 people. By the time I finished graduate school, it employed 112. My father ran it with a quietness that confused people who expected a man of his success to be louder. He dressed plainly. He drove a truck that was 10 years old. He knew every employee's name and their spouse's name and their kids' names, and he kept a small notebook in his breast pocket where he wrote things down. Not to remember them later, but, he told me once, because writing something down was a way of paying attention to it. My sister had worked in the company briefly years ago. She had opinions about the branding. She had left after 14 months to focus on her lifestyle, she said. She still spoke about the company with the authority of a major shareholder at every family gathering, which technically she was not, but no one had ever sat down and made that explicit. I was not involved in the business. I had never wanted to be. My father never pushed it. What he pushed, quietly, consistently, was me. He came to things. He drove 40 minutes to see me receive a department award at the rehab center and brought flowers he had stopped to pick up at a gas station because he had forgotten to plan ahead, and the gas station flowers looked a little sad, but he was holding them with both hands like they were the finest. Arrangement in Tennessee. When I bought my apartment, the one with the cracked tile, he insisted on helping me move and spent 3 hours assembling a bookshelf from a box, and then stood back and looked at it like he had built something that would outlast both of us. He asked about my patients. He remembered their names from the stories I told months before. He asked follow-up questions. My sister called him every Sunday. She called to tell him things. I called him to ask how he was. He always said fine, and then talked for an hour. The Thanksgiving I was 31, my sister arrived 40 minutes late. With a charcuterie board she had assembled herself and required several minutes to properly present before we could move on. Derek stood at the kitchen island drinking bourbon and asking my father about the company in the specific way of men who are actually asking about money without wanting to be seen asking about money. My father answered pleasantly and said very little. I had made the pie. I had also made the sweet potatoes and the green beans because my mother had asked me to come early and help, and I had come early and helped. And my sister had arrived 40 minutes late with a charcuterie board and received the kind of applause that arriving with something beautiful earns even when you arrive after everything else is already done. We sat down. My father said grace. My sister talked about a renovation they were considering, something involving an extension off the back of the house, a sunroom or a screened porch. She was still deciding. Derek talked about the market. My mother asked about the neighbors. My father listened and ate and occasionally asked a question. I talked about a patient I had recently discharged, a woman of 73 who had come to us after a hip replacement, unable to walk more than a few steps without stopping, and who had left us 3 weeks later asking if there was a 5K she could train for. I was proud of her. I was proud of the work. My sister waited until I finished and then said, with the bright smile she used when she was saying something that she knew would land but wanted deniability around, "That's so sweet that you find meaning in that. I always think it takes a certain kind of person to want to work with. You know, people who are struggling. Not everyone has the patience for it." She said it like a compliment. She had a gift for that. My mother smiled at me in the way that meant, let it go. My father set his fork down for a moment. He did not say anything. He picked his fork back up. After dinner, while my sister and Derek sat in the living room and my mother made coffee, I washed dishes at the kitchen sink and my father came and stood beside me and dried them without being asked. We worked for a few minutes in silence. Then he said, "You know what I notice about the work you do?" I said I didn't. He said, "People come to you when they've lost something they thought was gone forever, and you give it back to them. I don't think there's anything more important than that." He put a dry dish in the cabinet and went to get the next one. I did not say anything. I just kept washing. The Christmas I was 32, things shifted. The company had had its best year. My father was 71 and had begun, in the preceding year, to seem tired in a way that was different from ordinary tiredness. A slowness to the eyes sometimes, a tendency to pause before answering that had not been there before. He had seen doctors. He did not make a large production of it. He told me in a phone call on a weekday afternoon that there were some things they were watching, that he was not worried, that I should not worry either, and that he was thinking about what he wanted the next few years to look like. My sister threw the Christmas party that year. She had done this before, had gradually assumed the holiday in the way she assumed most things, through enthusiasm and effort that made it difficult to object. The party was at her house, catered, with fairy lights on every surface and a playlist someone had professionally curated and a signature cocktail she had named. It was a Friday evening. I drove over after work, still in my work clothes, because I had not had time to go home and change, and I arrived to a house full of extended family and some of my sister's friends and Derek's colleagues and my parents sitting in the living room, looking slightly outnumbered. My sister was in a green dress. She had had her hair done. She moved through the party with the ease of someone who had been practicing for it her entire life. About an hour in, she called for attention. She did this with the confidence of a woman who has never tapped a glass and not had the room go quiet. She raised her cocktail and she said she wanted to take a moment to celebrate the year, to thank everyone for being there, and to say a few words about family. She talked about her parents, graciously, warmly. She talked about Derek and their home and the year they had built together. Then she looked at me. She said, with that same bright smile, "And my little sister is here, all the way from her busy schedule of, what is it you're doing now? Still at the rehab place?" I said yes. She said, "That's so wonderful. She's always been the one who found a different path. We used to joke when we were kids that she was the one who would end up needing someone to take care of her, and here she is taking care of everyone else. She laughed. Several people laughed politely. Honestly, I think we all assumed she'd end up relying on the family forever, and instead, she went and built her own little life. We're proud of you, sweetheart. She raised her glass at me. I raised mine back. My father, across the room, did not laugh. He looked at my sister for a long moment, and then he looked at me, and I recognized the look. I had seen it at Thanksgiving tables and dinner tables and school plays and award ceremonies. It was the look that said, "I heard you. I see what just happened." Then he turned and said something to my mother, and the party moved on. My father had a stroke in March. He survived it. He spent 2 weeks in the hospital and came home with a new seriousness about things, a willingness to say what he meant that had always been present but was now closer to the surface, without the layer of patience over it that he used to maintain. He moved more slowly. He tired more easily, but his mind was clear and his eyes were the same. And the months that followed, he did something I did not know about until much later. He met with his estate attorney, a woman named Ms. Patterson, who had handled his affairs for nearly 2 decades, and he revised his will. He wrote a letter. He documented specific incidents, specific patterns, specific decisions he had made and why. Ms. Patterson told me later that he came to her with notes already written in his small, careful handwriting, and that he knew exactly what he wanted, and that he sat across from her desk and went through every item without hesitation. He did not tell me any of this. He just kept calling on weekday afternoons, kept asking about my patients, kept remembering the names. He passed away the following November, 14 months after the stroke, from a second one that came in his sleep. My mother found him in the morning. She called me first. I drove to the house. My sister arrived an hour after I did. She cried in the way she did everything, fully and with presence. I sat with my mother at the kitchen table and held her hand, and we stayed quiet together. The days that followed were the kind that exist outside of normal time. Arrangements, phone calls, a funeral with 140 people, and a eulogy that his longtime operations manager gave, and that made most of the room cry, including me, including Derek, including my sister. I did not cry at the funeral. I had been crying for days, privately, in my car mostly, and by the time the service came, I was wrung out and still. I stood at the front of the room with my mother and my sister, and I accepted condolences for 3 hours, and I thought about gas station flowers and kitchen dishes, and a bookshelf assembled with love, and not enough instruction. 3 weeks after the funeral, my sister called me. She was already talking about the company. She wanted to know about the estate timeline. She wanted to know if I had heard from Ms. Patterson. She said she had been thinking and that she had some ideas about the business, that Derek actually had some experience in logistics adjacent industries, and that there might be a real opportunity to modernize some things. I told her I had not heard from Ms. Patterson yet. She said she was sure it would all be straightforward. She said Dad had always been clear that the business was the family legacy. She said this with the authority she always applied to things she had decided were already settled. I said I was sure we would hear soon. We heard the following Tuesday. Ms. Patterson's office called and asked if I could come in Thursday morning. She said she was also reaching out to my mother and my sister to schedule a meeting. Her voice on the phone was professional and warm and gave away nothing, which was exactly what I would have expected from a woman my father trusted for 20 years. I said I would be there. I went home and sat at my kitchen table for a long time. The envelope I had sent 3 weeks ago. Not a literal one, but the one I had been composing in my head for 32 years. The one that contained every quiet moment and every raised glass, and every time I had washed dishes while someone else received the applause. That envelope was somewhere in Ms. Patterson's office. My father had sealed it. I had just been the one waiting for it to be delivered. The meeting was at 10 in the morning. My mother and my sister were already in the waiting room when I arrived. My sister was wearing the particular expression she wore when she was in professional settings, composed, authoritative, slightly impatient. She asked if I knew what this was about. I said I assumed it was the will. She nodded and said she was sure it was standard. She said it in the way she said most things, as though she had already processed the likely outcomes and found them acceptable. We were shown into Ms. Patterson's office. She was in her 60s, small and precise, with reading glasses on a chain. She shook each of our hands and offered coffee and waited until we had settled before she opened the folder in front of her. She said she wanted to start by saying that my father had been one of the most deliberate clients she had worked with in her career, that he had approached this process with unusual care, and that she wanted to honor that by being equally clear and thorough. My sister shifted slightly in her seat. Ms. Patterson explained the structure of the estate first. My father had maintained his personal assets entirely separate from the family finances. His savings, his investment accounts, and his ownership stake in the company had been individually held, not commingled with any household assets, which passed directly to my mother in full as her own property. This was the first thing she wanted to be clear about, she said. My mother was fully provided for, without condition or complication. My sister nodded. This was expected. Then Ms. Tate Patterson said that my father's personal estate, his individual holdings, including his ownership interest in the company, was governed by a will that he had revised 16 months prior, and that he had also prepared a personal letter to accompany it, which she would read in part because he had specifically asked her to. She put on her reading glasses. She said my father had written, "I have watched my daughters for 30 years. I have watched what each of them has built, and I have watched how they have treated the people around them while building it. A man's estate is not simply money. It is the last, clear statement of what he believed mattered. I want mine to be clear." My sister's expression did not change, but she stopped moving. Ms. Patterson continued. The personal estate was to be divided with 65% passing to me, to be held in a trust I could access in full, with a provision that a portion be used at my discretion to fund occupational therapy services at underserved rehabilitation facilities, something my father had researched and found meaningful. The remaining 35% was directed to the company's Employee Assistance Fund, which my father had established years earlier for workers facing medical or family hardship, and which he had now substantially endowed. My sisters received a specific bequest, a piece of property, a lake house the family had owned, which was valued and real and not nothing. It was also not the company. It was also not the company. It was also not 65%. My sister said, very quietly, the business. Ms. Patterson said that the ownership interest in the company passed through the trust to me, with the existing management team retained and given significant operational autonomy. My father had been clear that the company was built by its people and should continue to be run by them. My sister said, that's not, he never said. Ms. Patterson said that my father had been very deliberate. She said he had written in the letter, I know this may be unexpected. I need you to understand that it is not punishment. It is accuracy. There's a difference between the person who shows up and the person who shows up for the show. I have always known the difference. I believe if she is honest with herself, she does too. My mother was crying quietly. She had known, I realized, not the specifics but the direction of it. She had known, and she had not argued with him because she had always loved peace more than fairness, and this time, for once, they had turned out to be the same thing. My sister looked at me. I looked back at her. I did not feel what I thought I would feel. I had spent years imagining what this kind of moment might feel like, imagining being seen, being chosen, being told plainly by someone in a position to mean it that what I had done had mattered. I had imagined it would feel like triumph. It felt like grief, mostly. Like something that should have been said at a dinner table years ago, over dishes, and instead had to be said here, in a lawyer's office, by a man who was no longer present to say it. It felt like love that had run out of time. My sister did not speak to me for most of the following month. When she did, it was in short functional messages, logistics around the lake house transfer, a question about a piece of furniture. She did not yell. She did not accuse. I think part of her knew, the way people sometimes know the things they have worked hardest, not to know that if she said it out loud, said this is unfair, I deserved more, I was the one he should have chosen, she would have to hear herself say it, and that what she heard would tell her something she was not ready to learn. I talked to a lawyer of my own. I talked to the company's management team, all of whom my father had spoken to before he died, who received me with a warmth that told me he had prepared them too. I kept my job at the rehab center. I had no intention of leaving it. I had a meeting with the new director of the Employee Assistance Fund to talk about the occupational therapy endowment and sat across from her with my father's notebook open in front of me, the small one from his breast pocket, which my mother had given me, and wrote things down. Not to remember them later, but to pay attention. I called my mother every Sunday. I started calling to tell her things. About my patients, my work, small things that happened in a Tuesday afternoon. She started telling me things back. Small things. Things about her week. Things she had been keeping to herself because there had not always been space. There was space now. A few months after the estate was settled, my sister and I met for coffee. She had asked. I had said yes. We sat across from each other in a place near her house with good light and expensive pastries and the kind of ambient noise that makes it easier to say difficult things. She had aged a little in the months since the meeting. Not badly. Just more honestly. She said she had been thinking. I said okay. She said she knew that she had not always been. She stopped and tried again. She said she knew there were ways she had treated me over the years that she had told herself were teasing, were normal sibling friction, were just how families worked, and that she had spent the last several months having to look at them differently. I let her talk. She said she didn't know if she was asking for forgiveness or just. She stopped again. She said she just wanted me to know that she understood now, or was starting to. I looked at her for a long moment. Outside the window, the November light was coming down flat and clear, the way it does in Tennessee in late fall when the leaves are down and there is nothing between you and the sky. I said, Dad used to say that watching someone is how you love them. He meant really watching, not to win something, just to see. She looked at her coffee. I said, I think he watched us both. I think he saw both of us clearly. I paused. I think the hardest part isn't the will. I think the hardest part isn't the will. I think the hardest part is knowing what he saw. She didn't say anything for a while. Then she said, quietly, yeah. We sat in the November light and drank her coffee and did not say very much else. When we left, we hugged for the first time in a long time. Not the kind of hug that means everything is resolved, but the kind that means everything is resolved, but the kind that means I am willing to keep going. The kind that is a beginning, not an ending. That evening, I drove home through East Nashville and parked in front of my building and sat in the car for a while. I had been meaning to move. The crack in the bathroom tile had finally been fixed. The landlord had gotten to it after 18 months, which counted as responsive by his standards. But I had found a small house in a neighborhood I liked, with a back porch and a yard that would need work, and I was thinking about it. I thought about an envelope sealed on a Tuesday evening. I thought about gas station flowers, held with both hands. I thought about a bookshelf that would outlast both of us. My father had not waited until the end to love me. He had been doing it the whole time, quietly, in the ways available to him. A glance across a dinner table, a question asked and remembered, a presence at things that did not require his presence. The will was not where his love lived. The will was just the last sentence of something he had been saying for 30 years, spoken plainly at last, when he finally had the words and the silence to say it. I sat in the car until the streetlights came on. Then I went inside, made coffee, and let it cool on the counter. Outside, Nashville went on doing what it always did, moving, lit up, full of people building things and watching things and waiting for the world to catch up. I was in no hurry. Neither, it turned out, had my father been. He had just been paying attention, writing things down, watching the way you watch someone you love, not to catch them, not to win, just to make sure they knew they had been seen,